So since this is the first one, I was gonna like start with why. You know what I mean? So so my old so big motivation in my life for the last 20 years was simply staying alive and keeping my head down and providing for a family, and that's kind of coming to an end because my youngest boy's graduating college and all this shit. And so now I feel compelled to start doing something. You know what I mean? I don't know. It ain't got to be just to kind of leave a mark somehow. And so I'm trying all kinds of different shit, like the entrepreneurial thing. I want to try to get out from being an employee. I want to just leave a mark. And so I'm just going to start talking. I'm going to probably, I don't want to get on social media. I fucking hate it, to be honest with you. I started getting on Twitter and I'm like, God, I don't know if anybody can consume this shit for more than a minute or two at a time. I don't know. So that may not last, but I'm trying it out. And then maybe, if anything, maybe I can build it into my routine where I'm just doing it for like an hour a week.
Yeah. Well, we were doing it right there at the coffee shop, talking about the good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You know? I feel like that's the origin.
Yeah. So I don't know. That's what I'm doing. And I'm just going to start talking, and I'm just going to blast it out there. And if I don't even give a shit if anybody listens.
Yeah.
I'm not going to listen. I don't know. Maybe if somebody's got like some constructive feedback or something, but I'm not going to like obsess over comments or views or anything like that. At least for now.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. It could go to my head. In which case, hopefully somebody can slap me around and get me out. But and then other than that, I was going to we can so are you going to do this regularly with me?
Yeah, sure, man.
And then we can so then we're just going to introduce you, and then maybe next time or something you can introduce me. But I'm curious. I'm really actually curious to understand where people come from. I don't particularly like being around lots of people. I don't have a lot of friends, and I'm not terribly trusting of other people. But I am curious. So when people have these interesting stories, I like to hear them. And I've discovered, I don't know that this is the actual meaning of life, but collecting stories does seem to be the point. Even bad stories, just interesting stories seems to be the whole point of this whole mess.
Yeah.
So, so I know we've talked a few times already, but you grew up here in Alabama, Birmingham?
That's right.
And then where did you go to high school?
Right up the hill, up here at Altamont, about 2 miles from here.
Affluent place, or is
Yep.
And then from high school you went to college.
Yep.
Where'd you go?
Hampton-Sydney College.
Is that a private
in
place?
Virginia. Yeah, man. Very similar.
And studied economics.
That's right.
So I've found economics to be. I learned a little bit of that. The introductory courses and shit you get from it's basics. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. But I was super fascinated by it, and the fact that I expected it to be mostly accounting,
right? But
it turned out to be a study of human behavior, and I thought that was super fascinating. What do you think of it?
Well, man, I think what you just said is where I landed on it as well. Which the stuff that stuck with me was the first 2 years. The behavioral, human decision-making side of it. Because the further down the path you go, as far as converting that information into something useful for a career, then it's models, spreadsheets, which I guess in a grand sense of something is useful, depending on what you want to do. But as far as the applicable nature to all things that involve interacting with human beings, the introductory courses are the most interesting.
Have you heard of the Austrian School of Economics?
Mhm.
Have you heard of it? You've heard of it?
From you, actually.
So, I'm not a scholar in it, but my understanding, in fact, the epicenter of all Austrian economics is down here in Auburn, Alabama, the Mises Institute. But they stop at human behavior, and they basically, if my understanding is that they don't try to explain macroeconomic through the collection of, like, my understanding is that a lot of the economics you've learned in school or whatever is focused on studying relationships between aggregates like unemployment and inflation, and like relationships between them and all that stuff. And the Austrian school basically throws that away. It says that's futile. Like, there is no relationship. Like, it stops at the behavior of a human being.
Okay.
Anyway, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think you'd find it interesting.
Yeah.
There's I listen to a bunch of podcasts and stuff. There's this guy named Saifedean.
Yeah.
Or whatever. I would suggest it, depending on how you can I would suggest it, but if you have differing opinions, you gotta have a little bit of a thick skin. He's gonna call you a retard or something. But and then from there you went to DC.
Yep. Straight to DC.
And okay, first of all, why? Like,
Man, I would call it the typical graduate starry-eyedness of just like being shown from every respectable adult that I knew that was the way to improve things in this country, was to be involved in the epicenter of policy. And economics, I thought, was a good background as well, from that human behavior aspect, to go directly into, working your way up essentially the most bureaucratic ladder that exists in the country. So I thought, in order to improve the things that I thought needed improvement here at home in Alabama, that was a good path to take to make those changes.
The impression I got is that your parents have been very politically active your whole life, or
That's
whatever,
right.
and like you were kind of brought up in that local politics and stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Like politics in general, or just more of like the philosophy
Um,
where you have
if there is a good side of it, I would say the good side. Like, my dad was a judge for a long time. Civil judges are elected here, which is kind of crazy in a lot of ways. So some of my earliest memories were just being on like the campaign trail with him, and seeing that you had to kind of do that in order to do actual good.
Yeah.
So that was like, I had like maybe too good of an example.
Yeah.
Because I was like, oh, okay, so if you play the game, if you get people on your side and get into these elected positions, then you have the opportunity to actually do good stuff, which is what he did. I got to see that. He was a judge for 18 years, and his reputation among everybody from lawyers all the way down to, defendants, was a good reputation the whole time, because he did right by people. And so that was my example. Okay, here we go. If you do this and get here, then you have the opportunity to do good for people. And yeah, so once I got to DC and got a good cold look at it.
Okay, before we get to that, so did your father have like does he have a positive opinion about politics, local politics, or is it is it degraded over time, or is he?
Some of both, yeah. But he still believes that in order to change something, you have to kind of get to the heart of it. And I'm talking about my dad, but my mom's the same way. Her path was a little bit different. She was never a lawyer, but she was certainly examining a broad situation and determining, the most direct path of action to cause positive change. Her thing was more the environment and also women's issues. But yeah, both of them were, if I ever complained about anything, no matter what it was, their response was always like, well, do something about that. And so I think that motivation was what brought me towards politics in DC.
And then, so then you get to DC as a 22-year-old kid?
Yep.
You were a staffer?
Yep. Yeah, immediately got a job with a representative who, it was kind of a crazy intro to politics in general, because he was a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, which is a smaller group of representatives made up of African American members. Of course, they are focused on issues that pertain to African American populations. And this was in 2009, which was when the Affordable Care Act, some people call Obamacare, was being proposed and was making its way through. And he took a stand as the one black guy in Congress who was going to vote against then President Obama's Affordable Care Act. And I was like an intern on the phones. So that was my welcome to DC.
Yeah.
Was kind of that.
So do you think that was a principled thing, or was he
Looking back at it, I think it was a strategic move, because he was about to announce his candidacy for governor of Alabama. Mm-hmm. So his plan was to...
Do you think a lot of it... Do you think a lot of those decisions are strategic?
Imaginary chess pieces. Yeah,
Something
for sure.
Like that,
yeah, a lot of them.
It's almost got to a point in we would not have been on the same... I don't know that we are on the same political... I don't think we see things the same way politically, but I don't know that it matters. Because at the heart of it, there are ideas underneath all that can be discussed. And if people focus on the ideas rather than the politics, I think a lot of that shit falls away.
And if you could map either of our mental positions when it comes to politics, I think probably you would see something that started much farther apart that's worked its way towards call it libertarianism or just doing the right thing for yourself and trying to help out where you can.
I was not. I didn't vote until I was mid-20s or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then I didn't even know who I was voting for, why.
Yeah.
I didn't start paying attention. Ron Paul was one big...
Mm-hmm.
And only because it was you would hear him talk at a debate or something, you'd be like, it stuck out like a sore thumb.
Yeah.
Anyway. I don't...
Yeah, he was still up there when I was...
Did you meet him?
When I was up there. In passing.
Oh,
in passing.
Crazy.
Yeah, for sure.
Anyway, I was a big fan.
Yeah.
So, how'd that go? How'd the first one?
It was definitely a roller coaster ride, because it was a year. It was just a year. Because in order to run for a state office like governor, you have to relinquish your seat.
Okay.
So it was already okay, you guys start looking for a new job.
He knew he was running for governor when he got up there.
Yeah, he had been up there for a while. He had been up there for a few terms, but congressional terms are only 2 years, which is insane. So yeah, he right when I got up there, he already kind of knew, and then right after I got there, he announced. So it was kind of I was the driver as well. So if you need to make a phone call regarding your congressional office, you have to do that from this office on this phone. But if you need to make a campaign call for your governor's campaign, you can't make it from this phone because that's taxpayer phone. So you got to drive to a different office. So it was like it was hard to get a beat on things. It was just all very confusing at first.
We waste taxpayer money in the billions around here. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's like I could just see that attitude. It's like it's the contradiction that I saw that when I was in the military. It's just stark and hilarious.
Yeah.
So then so he relinquished his seat and you stayed there in DC.
Yeah, I very luckily, and probably again due to the reputation of my parents, secured a position with his successor, who is still up there and who is super badass, and I have a lot of respect for it as well. She's still the representative for the 7th District of Alabama. Yeah.
Okay. So, and then you were there for how long?
I worked for her for another 3 years through her first campaign, and then I worked the last 6 months of the 2012 presidential campaign as a field organizer, which was like super hectic as well, and also very, disheartening in a lot of ways. Because man, I mean, you remember how things were at that time. It had been 8 years of George W. Bush, who at the time was, one of the more conservative presidents that we had had. And then that led into 4 and then 8 years of President Barack Obama, who was supposedly one of the more progressive presidents we had. And yeah, so it was kind of like 16 years in the bag, and like the people who were screwed were still screwed, and the people who were still super rich were still super rich. So it was kind of like it was a good time to get out, It felt like a good time to be like, okay, maybe this isn't the way.
What was it like getting so my impression is that like over the course of the 4 years you determined that, or you left, like, I don't know, tell me what was it like when you were leaving? Were you like, just screw this place sort of thing? Or was it like
a little bit of that. Yeah. we had been forced to attend like an all-day team building workshop, which, as you can imagine, the theme was like nautical, like
SpongeBob?
The chief of staff was the captain.
Okay.
The legislative assistants were like the crewmen. Everybody had like their role on the stupid ship, and we were meant to like metaphorically learn how to work as a team. That, because on an old school ship, like it's a life and death situation. You need to know your role and perform it well. And then the day, I remember everybody was just, because I mean, you're not on a ship, you're in a conference room for the whole day, just brutally boring. And the next day was, there was a DC earthquake. It was like a magnitude 2 or something. And it's like as small an earthquake as you can have, like, computers were just shaking. But, on Capitol Hill, it's pretty much the #1 terrorist target on the planet. Something starts shaking, like you're not sure what it is. And the whole theme of that workshop was like, okay, the chief of staff is the captain. The captain is the first one on the boat, the last one off the boat. And when that shit started shaking, we just heard the door slam. And chief of staff had to run out the office, like without even checking to see if anybody was all right. And that was kind of a funny sign, because we were all just walking out. I mean, it was like literally 10 seconds of just. And so we were all walking out just laughing like, well, there goes the captain, And that was like a good sign. Already in my mind was thinking like, okay, this is not the most direct path to improve the world, the state, people's lives, whatever the goal is. And I was already starting to move towards the idea that maybe the best way to improve the world was through creating jobs for people, which was more like the entrepreneurial side of things.
So you left there, and what did you do? You came back home, or how did you wind up
Yeah. So my buddy and I had already started a small business called the Dull Drums. Play on words, of course, for kind of the doldrums, which is how we were kind of feeling. Another sailing term, when the wind's just not in your sails. But our idea was that it was about a year, man. It was fun. We went around to different drum shops and kind of spread the word to people who had like old broken drum sets in their basements or in their storage. And we worked together and with a craftsman to turn those broken drums into like furniture pieces, like hipster
cool.
style furniture pieces, wine racks and coffee tables and guitar racks. And so people could like, you know, the idea was kind of like, okay, the drum set should not just be collecting dust in the basement. Or, you know, the drum shop who has, you know, drums with cracks in them, they're not going to sell those things ever. So those drums should be able to live a life again. And yeah, man, that was fun. We ended up making a pretty decent little inventory of like artistic-ish furniture pieces that were, you know, ended up on people's walls and in a couple of, you know, offices and stuff like that. And so that was the way that we filled our time as we both kind of figured out what we wanted. He was on the Hill as well. He was working in
So you're still living in DC then?
That was a DC project. And my buddy and I is still my best friend, man, Duncan. He's up in New York now, but he was working for like as far right wing conservative politicians as possible. And I was, you know, further on the left, but we were still homies. We were co-captains of like a legendary softball team, which ended up with a lot of beer drinking and chatting and long road trips, which led to you know, that Dull Drums project and making moonshine a little bit too.
So you went from business to business, or you left that? And did you wind up? How did you wind up in Spain?
Yeah, that was the next resident location. Pretty typical story for Spain, but you just go for a visit and you're like, oh, wow, this is sweet. Because like DC we were both just kind of soured on what that city represented to us, as far as kind of the lifestyle necessary to be successful there, which was, aside from political views, was just like, man, really brutal mix of working as hard as possible and then kind of like medicating the stress of that by drinking a lot. So we both got out of there. He went to Denver. I went on a little adventure in Spain, got to Barcelona and was like, man, this is my spot. So came back home briefly, sold the 4Runner. I had already moved from the apartment into the car. Like I did a little road trip just living out of the car and, you know, was like, all right, I'm not getting a storage unit. So it wasn't a big transition. I left a couple of boxes at my parents' place, sold the car, and used that money to kind of get started over there. Within 6 months, I mean, Barcelona is that kind of place. It's like people just kind of, if you've burned out somewhere or you're ready to get the fuck out of somewhere, you kind of end up there. A lot of people do. So within a few months, I'd met a buddy who was kind of on the same path, just like burnout in Amsterdam, came to Barcelona, and we started an outdoor fitness strength and conditioning concept, which
yeah, and you ran that for a few years.
Yeah, 7 years.
Jeez.
Yeah.
And then you came back home.
Yeah, it's still rolling, man. The business is still going. We actually were one of the few businesses that went from a tiny, like almost business, my dad would call it more of like a hobby business, to when the pandemic hit, it turned into like a real thing. So I was able to sell my part of my ownership in the business, and move back here about a year and a half ago.
And now it's compost.
Yeah, now it's compost, man. Yeah. That the origins of that came from there, because I was just, the nutrition side of that business was what I was in charge of as well. I mean, I was giving classes, we were doing, you know, strength and conditioning trainings, but a lot of it was also nutrition coaching, and just the frustration of, you know, like explaining nutrition in a way, you know, people are like, yeah, but can I eat this? It's like, yeah, I got it, man. Like the package looks healthy, like it's green, it's got leaves on it, but like that's really not healthy, man. Like you just look at the ingredients, it's like it's the same. It's like a Snickers bar and this granola. It's like the same amount of sugar, man. Like
it says healthy.
Yeah, right. It's such a trick, man. It's such a trick.
Or it
And
says gluten-free or something.
Right.
Whatever the latest buzzword is.
anything, keto, vegan, omnivore,
Yeah.
carnivore, like
It was like a cholesterol-free. It was being like a package of bread.
yeah, gluten-free ice cream. Yeah, man. Yeah, and that just that same mentality of like, okay, what is the issue? Like, what could I actually tell these people that would be helpful? And the hard answer was just like, you need to be eating stuff that grows out of the ground mostly.
Yeah.
And that includes, a healthy chicken laying an egg. Like, that chicken is eating worms out of the ground, growing, producing food. That is food. Like, you can't hardly even trust an egg in the grocery store these days to be real food. So that
Comes in a carton.
Sure, man. Who knows where that egg came from or what that thing popped out of? And so, and vegetables as well. It's like, oh, that's a tomato. It's like, yeah, kinda.
It resembles one.
It resembles a tomato. Yeah. And so that led to, like, how do you improve this? Like, okay, learn about agriculture, learn about growing food, which was more like a personal thing, as was fitness at first. But that then very quickly snowballed into compost. In the restaurant world here in Birmingham, we got a bunch of restaurants. We got a bunch of very sustainably minded restaurant owners that want to, divert organics from the landfill, stop producing these, greenhouse gases. The EPA is releasing all this stuff these days, which, whatever, people need that to be motivated. But we're capitalizing on the fact that people are more willing to do the right thing now as a business, and using the food scraps from restaurants to create compost piles at community gardens to kind of free up their budget that they would be spending on fertilizers or compost.
It seems like a no-brainer. Like, I started doing it at the house. Like, the stuff I'm putting in the trash can is now diminished. You know what I mean? I put less shit in the trash
It's the
can.
heaviest, stinkiest stuff.
Yeah.
Is that organics for sure? But man, it's not just me being innovative. 10 years ago, it was impossible because, like I say, the organic food scraps are the heaviest stuff in the trash can, and we are a landfill state. That's one of our biggest industries. So if those landfill owners that are all private businesses are getting paid by the ton for trash getting brought in there, then they don't want diversion. Mm-hmm. They would much rather all the heavy, juicy, methane producing food scraps be in the landfill so that they can get paid for that. So it wasn't just that I thought of this and now we're going to do it. It's, man, in this state's history, it would have been impossible because the lawmakers, or even just the regulators who would come to your site and inspect your site, those people, even a decade ago, were bought and paid for by special interests, which in this state were trash people. Yeah. Solid waste was like, and in all the movies, like solid waste, like that's the ultimate gangster activity,
Dude, yeah, I hear there's some really crooked shit going on. Well, I guess landfills in general, but
yeah.
So that Moody fire, did that change things?
That definitely got people looking in the right direction, for sure. From what I can, so methane, among other things, ammonium, but methane is like the big greenhouse gas that gets produced from organic material that does not get composted. So if you make your compost pile in your backyard, it might smell a little funny, but only for a little while, because all those microbes are going to like munch up all the stuff that if you just took that same pile of food scraps and threw it in a landfill and it got sandwiched between like a trash bag and the hood of a broken down car, that organic material would react differently as opposed to if your chickens were picking through it. So when that trash, that 30 years of organic material was just sitting down there producing little methane inputs, and then that methane gas got soaked into all of the storm damage from the tornadoes and hurricanes we get down here.
Oh, dude,
Lightning strike, something happened, and that caught on fire.
my wife would come back. She used to work there, and she would tell me about their biggest thing was the selling the runoff, like the leche.
Leachate.
Leachate or whatever. They were all about that runoff, selling it or whatever. I don't know. Anyway,
It's a weird business.
and that brings us to date, right? Like,
Yeah. I got a van. That van transports those food scraps from restaurants to community gardens, and we manage their piles for them. And those piles, instead of sitting in a landfill and creating methane, after a couple months of management, get spread on garden beds and grow vegetables.
so one last thing. So you left. You were a little disheartened in DC or whatever. You left there thinking that wasn't the answer, and then went the entrepreneurial route with the aid of giving people jobs. I don't know that I have a question so much, but like I've kind of come around. If I see the state of things recently, especially, I don't know what to believe hardly anymore on the news or what's coming out on the news or whatever, what I hear, but things aren't looking super great. So like or I've maybe come at this from a different angle, but like I've concluded recently that all we can kind of do is prepare for the eventual catastrophe that's bound this way, and the only way the best way I think of to do it would be to get to know my neighbors, sort of build local. Ultimately, those are the people that I'm going to have to depend on or defend myself from, or something. You know what I mean? Like, so I'd like to, whatever wealth I've accumulated, which isn't a lot, but you saw my neighborhood. I don't think you need a lot, but like, keep. Just from a self-preservation aspect, I do have fond feelings towards a lot of my neighbors. I think they're really good people. But even if I didn't like them, I really don't want to be neighbors with a desperate person. You know what I mean? With desperate people. So keep an eye out. You know what I mean? I've totally lately found that that's going to wind up being the only thing that winds up saving any of us is familiarity and with your, the people in your immediate surroundings,
Yeah.
and, building relationships locally.
Man, you can come at that from a lot of ways, but let's take my parents, for example, because they still believe in the system and will continue to. But both of them see the difference in screaming at the TV about some national or international policy that no matter how loud you scream, you are not going to be able to change that. And if we spent 10% of the time as a country that we spend yelling at the TV, looking out the window and being active, whether that's on your street or in your community,
just being visible, maybe.
Man.
Just being visible in your front yard and talking,
seriously,
waving.
Because that's the trick, man. Whatever that manifests as, just living in the actual world. Like, okay, maybe a school board election is not as sexy as the president of the United States, but arguably, like, that is going to have a greater effect on the future of your children or whatever.
Yeah.
So if we would pay attention to what is actually around us as opposed to what is being dangled in front of our faces, man, I think that we would at least be able to stay on a more productive path than the one that we're headed down.
All right, man, we gotta go.
Dude,
That was good.
yeah,
Nice.